Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Collective Clicks podcast. This is your host, Brandon Bateman, and today I'm joined by Sean. We're going to talk to Sean all about his entrepreneurial journey, if you should build a big or smaller business. We talk about how to use data better and messaging better in marketing to find more off-market properties. It's a super interesting conversation, and I'll see you guys there. Sean, how are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm actually super excited to have you here on the podcast today. And this we've been talking for 19 minutes now about all the cool stuff that you've been up to in your business. At some point, I realized we got to get this recorded. So we're just going to do the whole podcast episode before we actually kick this thing off the ground. Yeah. So I'm super excited to have you here today and get to experience your wealth of knowledge. For anybody that's listening that doesn't know who you are, what you do, what's the elevator pitch?
Oh, well, basically I help make public records usable for identifying your best next customer. And, public records are this amazing resource that we have in real estate where you can know every potential customer by name. And my background is in tech and real estate. So it was kind of putting those two things together really worked well here.
Yeah, it's super natural next step. And that said, let's talk about that background a little bit. Briefly, like what have you done before this, and what drove you to do what you're doing today?
Yeah, well, I got lucky. My parents bought a computer, an Apple II, not even a 2 Plus, back in 1978. So 10 years old, and
my goodness,
I kind of took to it, learned to program. Was working as a software engineer by age 14. Dropped out of college at 18 to start my first software company. Did a good stint in Silicon Valley with 3 pretty big startups. And, and then after the dot-com crash, ended up flipping houses and other properties, flipped 160 properties. And, and then at the end of '05, kind of these big economic changes, kind of forcing big life changes, got pretty concerned about owning real estate, sold everything. And was collecting data on every foreclosure in California and launched a service called PropertyRadar. And then as the foreclosure crisis slowed down, rebranded that to PropertyRadar and started covering, all properties and, kind of grown from there.
Okay, wild. So you've had a couple big shakeups for you.
Yeah.
A couple big obstacles in the past. So the .com crash, that's obviously a big one, and you switched from technology to real estate.
Yeah, that's kind of a crazy little story. When it happened, you kind of needed to scale back. I'm a startup guy, and startups kind of just that whole ecosystem kind of collapsed. I could have gone to work for a big company. I had a friend who made that jump, and had a pretty good offer there, but instead got rid of the place in the Bay Area, moved to the vacation home, took a year off, worked on getting my wife pregnant, and played. And through that, met a commercial real estate broker and developer who was making, $2-3 million a year, but had all this free time. And so, we were going kite surfing and snowboarding and water skiing and wake surfing and all this stuff. And, but he was making $2 million a year and I was not working. And I'm like, I kind of want your gig. That seems better than going back to Silicon Valley where I was putting in, 48-hour days with no sleep. And, and he introduced me to a friend of his that was flipping foreclosures and said I should go write software for him. Met him and said, I'm not writing software for 40 people. I want to write software for millions of people. And, saw he was doing pretty well and, ended up he ended up showing me his books and financials, had this amazing return on investment. I'm like, wow, if I took the money I made in Silicon Valley and put it to use here, I'm going to make more money than I'm going to make going back to Silicon Valley unless I, grab the brass ring and, am early at Google or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's cool. So that's what got you into real estate. Then you get into the software for foreclosures, and the completely unprecedented event of COVID happens where foreclosures just dry up. That's wild.
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, we made the shift from I decided to shift away from just foreclosures in 2010, so long before um, COVID. And, we broadened to cover all properties and lots of different distress signals. Back really starting, we launched that in 2012. So we had this much broader platform than just foreclosures. But, we're still, I would say we're the number one foreclosure information platform, uh, in the nation. And, so the COVID definitely hurt that business as well as just business overall. I mean, realtors, mortgage brokers, you know, roofers, HVAC, all, everybody kind of took a big step back there for a little bit.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm actually really curious to hear your advice, and I'll give you a little bit of context where I'm coming from here. I am, I think, 7 years into entrepreneurship right now, and I'd argue that probably many people listening to this are in a similar boat, right? In my
Yeah.
case, I'm also just like a young dude, right? Like I was probably learning how to eat solid foods when you were building software, right? So to talk to somebody who's been in this game for a little bit about some of these shifts is a little wild, because someone told me the other day, in every 10 years of business, you can count on having like 2 great years, 6 good years, 2 years that might put you out of business that are pretty terrible, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the standard. And I say I've seen a lot of the great and a lot of the good, and I haven't seen a lot of the like terrible yet. And part of that's just the cycle, right? Like there
Yeah.
just hasn't been enough time. So like someone who's kind of seen that perspective, like been through a lot of this, like you've changed like your career, so to speak, more than a few times. What's your perspective? How do you manage that?
Yeah. So and there's a backstory here. So I started that software company when I was 18, and we did incredibly well at first, but I brought on some partners, and they just turned out to be flat out crooks. And so, at 18, at first the software did really well. I mean, we sold $1 million our first 90 days, right? And I was taking home a big paycheck. I bought a house, I bought a Porsche, I bought an SUV, I bought a boat, a ski boat. Like I was rolling at 18, right? And so it was great. Until they, started stealing money and all the rest, and it kind of all unfolded. But I still had accumulated a little wealth pretty early, and my dad wanted to retire to Hawaii as a professor, and he loved photography, and there was a Homes and Land magazine for sale in Hawaii, and this is 1988 probably now, and so he says, hey, will you go in on it with me 50-50? Will you run it for 2 years till I can take early retirement? And then I'll take over and we'll continue to split the profits, and you can go back to software doing whatever you want. I'm like, 2 years in Hawaii? Sure, I'll do that. And so I rented the house out, moved to Hawaii. We bought this magazine, and it was right when the crisis happened in Japan. And so shortly, like just months after we buy this magazine, the real estate market in Hawaii goes in the absolute toilet. And, I can barely sell an ad. And I work my ass off and struggle for 2 years. And then I told my dad, hey, you got to come take this over. 2 years is up. And he's like, God, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to stay a professor. And we sold the business off. But it was this important lesson for me that like this was a good business, right? There was nothing wrong with the business, and it was in a great market, in a great location, and all the rest. And here was this external factor, a debt crisis in Japan, that completely decimated it for a period of time. And that turned back into a good business, like 4 years later. But I was out, right? I didn't want to wait that through. And it really made me a student of economics, and also just I learned two important lessons, right? Change is the only constant, and all opportunity comes from change, right? Um, my leaving that and going on to do the next thing, I ended up launching the first streaming video for the internet, right? Wouldn't have happened had that market been good and it all worked out well. So it created this whole new opportunity for me that ended up being a huge opportunity. Mark Cuban started his software or his company on broadcast.com using the software I brought out to the market. So, I think don't get too indebted, right? If you're carrying too much debt, it's really hard to survive through those transitions. So I carry a very low debt load. Honestly, the last, especially as debt went cheaper and cheaper up until it went expensive, like by taking on more and more debt, you could build incredible wealth. And I didn't build as much wealth as I could have through that period of time. But I also slept like a baby, and when those rates did go up, it didn't impact me at all, right? So I think other than keeping your debt load low, go for it, make it happen, and just know that change is going to happen, and when it happens, roll with it and look for the opportunity.
Fair enough. That's super cool. I'm actually really curious to hear your perspective, because if you look at entrepreneurs in general, I know that it's not exactly defined like this, but sometimes it really feels like there's like two different paths. There's like the Silicon Valley, raise VC funding, build a massive company, build to sell, basically, side of it. And then there's the more like lifestyle side of it, which is, it's often more like, so especially when you went from like Silicon Valley to like flipping houses, much more like a lifestyle type of company. Not that you can't sell those types of companies or whatever the case is. I'm curious, like in your perspective from like startup or big business or whatever you want to call it compared to small business, what's the experience like, and what's your opinion?
Yeah. I have so much to unpack there. And the third is the long haul bootstrap, that you can build real big value over an extended period of time as well. There's plenty of big $1 billion companies that took 20 years to see their inflection point. And we don't talk about those. We talk about the ones that, got there in 2, 3, 4 years, the Ubers and the whatever, right? But that's not the norm. And, you have to remember about the venture capital model is their model is that 1 out of 10 is going to work, right? So you're like, oh, I got a VC investment. Okay, what you got is a less than 10% chance of not being completely wiped out by that VC, even if your business is marginally good. Right. So if you go VC backed and you have a good but not great business, they're done with, they would rather see you shut down, because that's an easier thing to explain to their limited partners than to see you continue to hobble along and maybe grow something good over 10 or 20 years, because that's beyond their investment horizon. So you really have to have amazing product market channel model fit to be VC backed, right? If you don't have that ability to really scale and make it happen, which most of these businesses that I see people going, oh, I'm going to go raise VC, like, you're not venture scale. You should not be seeking VC. If you find VC stupid enough to invest in your non-venture scale business, all you're doing is setting yourself up for failure. And so, that's
a great perspective.
And there are certain things where VC makes sense. You got to throw a lot of money at the thing. You have to run, underwater for quite a bit of time just to get the talent or to spend the money marketing to create the market, whatever. There are things that VC are the right play for. But so many people have a good business idea and then go, oh, I want to raise venture capital. And that venture capital will ruin the business, not help it, other than the initial cash up front.
That's a great perspective. I didn't think about like there's that gray area between, and maybe it's not between, but like the idea of, so let's simplify it though a little bit. Let's just say then, like, regardless of how you get to the big business, like maybe it's that long haul bootstrap. type of thing. Let's call that versus a lifestyle business, or maybe there's even like intersection between those. Like how do you see and understand the difference there? And to somebody who like could go any direction, like what's your advice having been in companies of different types?
Yeah, I've had periods where my company's felt more like a lifestyle company. It's been, producing a lot of cash, and maybe I've taken that cash versus reinvest. I do think it's kind of an important decision to make about what you want, right? I want to build a big company, right? So I reinvest everything back in, and I'm trying to build something large. And so I really think it comes to what you want, and then does that business support that, right? Um, you know, they are different, um, and I think it really comes down to, you know, really that choice of, do you want lifestyle or do you want growth? You don't get both, right? If you want growth, you occasionally do, but it's pretty rare, right? If you really want growth, you should be putting every penny back in as a bootstrap founder, right? And if you want lifestyle, you should be, optimizing for that. So some differences are, right? Like if you're building a lifestyle company, you're going to start putting your cars in the business. You're going to start, being a little tax aggressive with the business. You're going to use a subchapter S corp versus a C corp, right? You're just gonna the whole thing from the beginning kind of needs to be different, right? Like, if you're building to sell, you want to be thinking about oh, the small business stock exception where you can get $10 million tax free, but it's got to be a C corp. It can't be an S corp. And like almost no tax advisors and stuff that you go and you go, oh, I want to start a business. Like they don't walk you through these major differences between building a lifestyle company where you want to be tax efficient, you want to write off as much as possible, you want to, create as much cash flow as possible from, I want to build to sell, which you want no cash flow, right? You want just enough, you want to pay yourself a salary to live on, and you want to, really put every penny back in and grow the value as quickly as you can. So they are fundamentally different.
Yeah, that's helpful perspective.
And it's hard to
I'm
switch from one to the other, by the way.
have you done it or tried?
Yeah, yeah. And it's not, yeah, because I did waffle for a little while. I went to lifestyle based for a while, and then came back to it and said, no, I want to sell. So started off wanting to, build something to sell. And I'm not looking to sell right now. Like I'm in this for the long haul. I'm trying to build something quite large over time, and over quite a few more years.
What changed your perspective?
Um, you know, uh, so I started off in the foreclosure information business, and I knew that business was going to be a cyclical business, and was actually in a process to sell it in 2009 in the middle of the foreclosure crisis, and so was kind of building to sell and trying to sell it during that period, and passed on a deal I shouldn't have passed on, took a deal I shouldn't have took, and the deal fell apart right at the last minute, and that's when I decided to pivot to property information and expand, because I felt like the foreclosure thing would be cyclical and I didn't want a cyclical business. And the property information business is just not, it's just not going to be something that's going to be a big business you're going to sell. I mean, you can, but it's not a change the world business, right? And so I switched more to lifestyle company kind of approach. And I also switched to a lifestyle company kind of approach because my sister and brother-in-law both were diagnosed with cancer. My dad was diagnosed with cancer. Like this had this
Wow.
whole major kind of life thing happen. And so this idea of growing something, I just didn't see that path at that time. Um, and then after all that settled out and I adopted my niece and got through all that stuff, got back to the business, and then just saw, wow, you know, public records is this incredible resource for identifying your next best customer. And it's something Home Depot uses, right? So if you take out a HELOC on your house, Home Depot is going to start advertising to you. But your local hardware store, your local roofer, your local spa dealer isn't going to do that, right? And in the investor side, we know a lot about public records, and we're pretty used to using lists and the rest. But realtors, even though they know about public records, don't really use them that way. Mortgage and all these other businesses don't. And boy, it's like, you know what? I want to help small local businesses leverage this data to compete against big business. And if I can do that effectively, and help them find their next best customers in a way that, Zillow can't outbid them for, that's pretty amazing. And that's a calling. And then my whole mindset switched. I want to build $1 billion company around that idea.
Got it. So how you saw the marketplace and how you saw the opportunity, it's basically the growth potential of the idea. Like when that changed in your mind, then you thought, I actually do want this big business that I can sell, and I'm willing to pursue that. And when you saw less opportunity,
whatever, not necessarily sell, but built for scale. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, that's super helpful. Let's talk about that a little bit. I'm curious to hear more about. Let's just take like the average investor. Data is the big. Sorry, you couldn't even see my hands on the screen. Data is the big, the big thing that everybody's talking about, right? In this industry, yes, because there's so much that we can do with this to target the right people. Because that data is actually very predictive of people selling their houses, it turns out. So that makes it very useful. In your opinion, the average like wholesaling, flipping, buy and hold, whatever it is, the average company doing direct to seller marketing for single family real estate acquisitions, how could they be leveraging data better than they are already?
I think the biggest one, honestly, is around the message. And this is like, so many lists you can create. Public records is just this amazing gift to this industry, right? Like, and all the different sources, and even the sources we don't offer that you can go gather yourself, like code enforcement and stuff that's really hard to aggregate at a national level. There's just so many places there to go get data and use data to target the folks that are most likely to need your services or most likely to be willing to sell you, their property. But then what we get is this universally shitty marketing, which is I buy houses, I pay cash, I close quick, I this, I that. Like nobody gives a shit about you. Stop with all the I, right? Like show a little empathy for that position that person's in. Show some understanding, show some expertise, right? Like you want to do more business, stop with the I. Nobody cares that you have cash. Everybody frickin' has cash. Every postcard in their mail says I buy for cash, right? Like that piece is where I think investors totally get it wrong. And, and if you think about it, at the end of the day, when you get that deal happens because you make a connection with that owner and they trust you and they go, you know what, I'm going to sell to you because you're the right person. And, so, thank God you overcame your terrible marketing with your yellow letters and your, fake handwriting and all that crap, right? And some of it works. I'm not saying it doesn't work, and there's a place for it, right? There are, methodics that only care about your cash, so there is sometimes a place for that. But messaging is the one place where I think investors make the most mistakes and do the worst job.
Yeah, super fair point. And I think you did a good job illustrating what you believe we should not do. Let's talk about what we should do. Like what's the opposite of that?
Let's take foreclosures, right? Because that's where I got my start, was in the foreclosure business. And so like use that public record data to target those folks that are in foreclosure, right? Because you don't want to waste your time. That's good for you as a business. It's good for the environment. You're sending out less postcards, right? It's efficient. It's good for everybody involved. But when you go knock on that door, when you go make that phone call, right? It's not, hey, you're in foreclosure, right? That's super predatory and targeted and just kind of doesn't feel good, right? What if instead, you knock on the door and say, hey, I live here in the area, and I just want to let you know we're seeing an uptick in foreclosures here locally, and it's not going to be a problem this time like in 2008. And sometimes bad things happen to good people, and I just want you to let you know if you have a neighbor or a friend or anybody else who's in this situation, like, I have a lot of expertise. I can talk to them about their options, and I'd love to help. But to the degree that you start seeing things on Zillow or other places about foreclosures, I just want to tell you, don't worry about it. It's not going to affect your home value like it did back in the thing. Now you're demonstrating expertise, you're demonstrating empathy, right? You're demonstrating that you care about the people in that situation, that you care about the neighborhood. Like, at that point, that person's going to go, you know what? Actually, you seem like a really good person. Can I share with you? I'm actually in foreclosure. You knew that already, but why make them feel bad, right? Like, think about what I always ask investors, like, think about this postcard you're about to send. Okay? Imagine that postcard ends up in your son or daughter's teacher's mailbox. How are they going to look at you when they see that postcard? How are they going to feel about you when they look at that postcard? What happens if that postcard ends up in their neighbor's mailbox by accident and you just outed them to their neighbor? Right? How will that postcard or whatever, when the neighbor brings it over and delivers it, how will it make them feel? Like, if it's going to make them feel like outed and bad, like, maybe rethink what you're doing. Like, you want to be a leader in your community. It's great to make money, but I think you'll make a lot more money if you're a leader and somebody people look up to and want to be associated with than if you're some predatory scammer.
Yeah. I love what you're saying, Sean. And the example of, like, the conversation at the doorstep made a ton of sense to me. Let's talk about, like, what a mailer would look like. I'm curious to hear this from your perspective.
Yeah, I think, kind of, back to very similar kind of thing, right? Like, I would probably talk about, foreclosures in the area, right? Like, hey, did you know foreclosures are ticking up? Don't worry, this isn't 2008. The regulations have changed. There's a lot more options, right? If you know anybody in this situation, I'm an expert. If you have any questions or concerns about how foreclosures might impact the area, right? Those are the kinds of things that I would try to get across. And you don't have much time to make an impression. So, both with, like, targeted online ads, so custom audience, with direct mail, and even with email to a degree. It's great when you get a response on those things, right? And somebody reaches out. But I look at all three of those as kind of to make touch points, to build trust, and to build mind share before you make a call, right? So with that kind of in mind, the other thing that I think about more on the postcard isn't, hey, what am I going to do here to necessarily make the sale, but what am I going to do to leave an impression so that when I call, I'm familiar, right? They already know me. They have some trust of me. We know brand recognition equals trust, even with the most untrustworthy characters. We see their names all the time, and we go, oh, they must be important. They must be good. So the more you get your brand in front of somebody, the more likely they are to engage with you. So that's useful. The other big thing with direct mail in particular that I try to do, and ads as well, is I try to leave a burning question, right? So maybe instead of saying, here's what's going on with foreclosures, say, hey, we're starting to see a change in foreclosures in the area. If you're worried about how that might affect your home, or somebody facing foreclosure, or you're facing foreclosure yourself and would like to talk about, what the impacts and options are, call me, right? But more leaving, and if you can even make it more of a burning question, think about clickbait, right? I like to think about if I can make my postcard like good clickbait, um, then I'm more likely to get that phone call because boy, that question's going to eat at that person to the point where they're going to call, right? Like, and this is why you get 5 ways to stop foreclosure. That's a good headline. People like, oh, there's five. I only know three. What are the other two, right? Maybe that one of those applies to me, right? So that kind of thing, I think works as well.
Very cool. Sean, you've been a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate everything that you've shared today. Um, and with that, I think it's about time, and it's time to wrap this up. Before we leave, though, is there anything else you want to share? And also, if anybody does want to look more into Property Radar, learn more about that, maybe connect with you in some way, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so propertyradar.com, definitely out there, deep data on real estate. We have the most powerful property search engine in the industry, over 250 criteria, and then marketing tools back behind that. And you can even export a custom audience to give to somebody great like Bateman Collective to use in a custom audience ad. Um, and then we're on LinkedIn and Facebook and, kind of all the usual places. And I am as well personally. I'm always happy to chat about any of this.
Very cool. Thanks a ton, Sean, for spending your time with us today. And for
Yeah,
everybody else listening, I will see you next week.
thank you.